Teams are regularly tasked with solving problems or executing big ideas, but if we jump from concept to execution, we run the risk of making bad decisions, wasting resources, hitting road bumps, and ultimately not achieving what it is we set out to. Today's guest is Atif Rafiq. After rising through digital native companies like Amazon and Yahoo, Atif held C-suite roles at McDonald's, Volvo, and MGM Resorts. Atif and I talk about his methods for upstream work, which he calls decision sprints, that help teams and organizations prepare for effective execution. He explains the difference between upstream and downstream activities, the 3 phases of upstream work, and so much more. Thank you so much for joining me today, Atif. I'm super psyched to dive in to this concept of the decision sprint, which I've been learning about through your book, and how it can really help teams make better decisions. Not only that, but actually do better work. And my favorite thing, have fewer meetings. So thank you for joining me today.
You're so welcome. It's a pleasure to join you, Maddie.
Let's start with just the lay of the land here. Can you describe at kind of a high level, or just kind of like laying out the framework of what is decision sprint all about?
When it comes to making rapid decision-making, high-quality decisions, what's really interesting is that it's less about the decision point and more about what I call upstream work. So in this book, I elaborate on the idea of upstream work, which is the point at which you have the raw idea or the raw objective. And you see, it seems very promising. There's a lot more questions than answers. And the process of going from a lot more questions than answers to confident decision-making is kind of a body of work that I point to be what I call the upstream part of the process. And that's really what I elaborate on. So kind of counterintuitively, if you want to be promote high quality and high velocity decision-making in your organization or team, the tables are set further upstream. And that's really what is the heart of what my book is all about.
Yeah, I loved the kind of realization that we kind of start with ideas and then we kind of make them happen. And there's actually a lot that has to happen between an idea or a problem is identified to executing the plan and unpacking what those steps are and what those processes are, and actually putting some structure to them makes a lot of sense, because it's often, as you pointed out very articulately, so many places where we kind of stumble through and end up having bad decisions or get stuck or kind of bulldoze over things and then end up having poor execution and poor results. So maybe you can unpack for us some of those kind of things that we're doing wrong that we, maybe have just habitually been doing, or we kind of don't even realize are so wrong. But what are the places we're kind of already messing up, so we can then talk about what we can do better in each of those places?
Of course, I talk about very concrete things like how you define the problem or a problem statement, how you begin to gather input from the team around the questions that should be explored around the problem statement, how you develop the answers, and then use all that work to kind of come up with some conclusions or recommendations. And, so it's kind of like a workflow in some respects, where if you go in a certain sequence and do a good job of it in terms of collaborating, you're likely to be more confident, more aligned in what you come out with as a set of recommendations. But if you take a step back, in the end, it's actually really about psychological safety and doing it in a way where you can still get your business objectives met and move at the right pace. So for example, everyone is familiar with the idea of having a promising idea or, really interesting, meaningful objective that they want to solve in the organization. Where things break down, the first pitfall is a rush to an opinion or a rush to alignment without having done what I call exploration. And exploration is sort of the first step of creating, psychological safety. So an exploration is essentially saying, okay, well, we don't know the answer. We haven't drawn any conclusions yet, but we're going to spend, a reasonable amount of time coming up with the problem statement so everyone knows what we're the forks in the road that we're trying to cross, and then getting the right input from within our team or organization in the form of questions, and then getting to the bottom of these questions with some reasonable answers. That's what I call building and running an exploration. It is a way to create psychological safety so you get high quality input from the brains you have in your organization, but also keep things on a pace and a track where you can actually, come out with, some perspective in a reasonable time frame, which you need as business is you need to keep up your pace and velocity, if that makes sense. So the first step is building and running an exploration. That's really the heart of being good at upstream work. And it's something that just is so easy to shortchange because in the human dynamics, if you're very experienced, you're going to have an opinion right away, or based on, other things you've seen, you're going to maybe rush to some judgment, right? And so creating the psychological safety in the right way is really what I'm advocating. And I think that's a big unlock for any leader in almost any context.
I'm thinking about a meeting that I was in a number of years ago where there was an opportunity presented to the nonprofit organization, and they brought it to the board and said, should we do this? And the first question I had was like, well, what are we trying to accomplish? Like, let's take a step back before we should decide if this is a good opportunity or not. Like, let's understand what we want to do. What's our mission here? Like, how does this fit in? Like, why would we even consider this in the first place? Just because it showed up on our desk doesn't mean we have to consider it. And I feel like that's kind of the exploration, is like the pulling back before you get to the like ideas and solutions and opinions. It's like the like, let's understand what the situation is. Let's seek data. And I think what you're saying about psychological safety is that if we go in being curious, if we're starting from a place of we don't have all the answers, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of things we have to gather, then we're all kind of starting on the same ground of not having opinions, not having solutions, not having answers. So it's safer to ask those questions. It's safer to surface the thinking. Is that, am I putting those together correctly?
You touched on questions. So let's talk about the role of questions in the process of innovating and being strategic and growing as an organization. What is the role of questions? Well, questions can be a friend or a foe. They're your friend if the right questions surface upstream. That's the point at which there is not a solution. And to your point, it's the stage at which you have sort of like this big ambiguous question: is this a good idea, or what is the right way to go about solving this problem we're having? And that's where you want to invite questions. So if you do a good job of getting the input from the brain of the organization around the right questions, and then spend time getting to the bottom of them, everyone will be working from high quality basis to then have opinions, right? Draw conclusions, come up with recommendations. Now, friends are a foe when the plan is very baked and everyone feels like, hey, we did all that already. And then you go to, let's say, some sponsor meeting or committee meeting or some decision meeting, and then the questions come up. They were missed. They were blind spots. They begin to unravel the progress. The confidence in the whatever is being put on the table is not going to be high, and that's where things get bureaucratic or stuck or go back to square one, and that's not good for teams. It's not good for the employee experience, right? It's why people get frustrated with their organization. So there is a stage where if you actually want to invite questions, you actually want to source them, is the language I use. And so in this book, while I talk about big companies like Amazon, McDonald's, Volvo, MGM Resorts, and real things we were trying to figure out and areas where we're trying to innovate, and the heart of the book in the middle is really kind of nuts and bolts workflow of like, what is the stage where you source questions and how do you do that effectively so that you actually have a great question list and a problem statement early on in the stage of an initiative.
I'm wondering if you could actually share a story of one of the projects or teams that you worked with and what that exploration stage looked like and kind of who participates and kind of how did that kind of what was surfaced that became super valuable as you went forward?
Sure. Well, all companies, are facing some interesting ideas, some promising idea or objective, right? Could be Netflix and the CEO says, hey, password sharing is an issue, or Uber, and they say, hey, how should we think about loyalty, for example? But to take a hypothetical, I worked at McDonald's and I was driving a lot of innovation and growth there as in the C-suite. And let's say, a contemporary example would be McDonald's and a coffee subscription. Like you do go to certain QSRs or restaurants and, you can pay them a monthly fee and and then you can get unlimited, drinks or coffees and things like that. Is that a good idea for McDonald's? How would you think about that? So instead of, having that idea and debating like this is terrible or this is amazing, right? Like you actually need to spend time building the exploration. And this exploration, you probably need questions regarding things like how much of a business driver it is, like the incrementality. Does it create more visits where people also buy food? Operationally, is it like really hard to pull off because you're in a drive-through and you're trying to share with a crew member that, oh, I have a subscription. There are probably some technology modifications that need to be done so your systems can process that. There's maybe some risk of abuse because if you give anyone anything unlimited, maybe small numbers of them actually abuse it, the privilege. So these are some of the major kind of things going on, ping, ping, ping in your mind around the room when you first hear about the idea. And the reality is that they're all very relevant considerations, and they themselves break down into some key questions. So instead of being fearful of those questions or trying to say, well, there's too many questions, let's kill this idea, let's actually build the right question list and spend some time getting to the bottom of them, because then we'll actually be standing on higher quality ground to draw some conclusions. It could be the modifications are not that hard, or the incrementality to the business could be quite promising, and that the risk of abuse is low, right? In those cases, this is a winning idea, right? And we should accelerate. We should really go for it. The challenge for many organizations is how do you go from the promise of an idea to confident execution? And that's the space in the middle where the upstream work is really essential. Teams spend weeks and months on it in reality. And I want to bring some method for that. And of course, some companies are good at this. I worked at Amazon, but Amazon is good because it has a founder-led culture. It's in the air. They don't teach you or document problem solving and curiosity. It's in the air. It's in the culture. And in the absence of a founder-led culture where that's been established, you need a system. And that's why I write about this kind of system.
I love that. I mean, so many organizations rely on systems, and even after a founder leaves, there's no guarantee the culture will stay. It needs to be maintained, and sometimes putting systems in creates that longevity that that teams really need. Let's keep moving, because we talked about exploration and creating safe space for people to identify the questions and the lack of information and where there's ambiguity and where we need more information. And then you're saying teams can go off and do some of that work to try to figure out and gather as much information, as many answers as we need to be able to move forward. What's the next phase of that upstream work?
A common word in a lot of companies is alignment, which is essentially shared understanding. People need to have a shared understanding in order to move forward. It's not a single part of the organization that's going to make something happen. So I'm a believer in alignment. I wasn't always a believer in alignment, and I can give you the backstory on that. But alignment does matter, because in the end, people need to understand. You need to have the hearts and minds behind an idea when it comes time for execution. And so after exploration, alignment is sort of the process of drawing conclusions and having people understand how we got there, because it's not good enough. And I hope no one is in a company where it's like, oh, the boss said to do this, so that's why we're doing this. That's not really ideal. It's more, we're doing this and here are the reasons and it makes sense to me. That is important. Now, some ideas are like, they're complex, right? So alignment is the stage where if you do a good job of exploration, then people are coming to the same conclusions. Not only, oh, this is a good idea, but conclusions are very layered. It's a good idea within these boundaries. The risk of this is low. The risk of this is kind of higher. So it's a very kind of layered cake of conclusions. And if people have a common understanding of those things, then your execution is just going to be stronger. People will understand things. They'll have fewer questions. They'll be more confident in the contribution they're making to execution. So alignment is the stage of drawing conclusions and creating shared understanding of the necessary actions. And that's really important. The backstory on why I didn't like the word alignment and actually banned it at Volvo was because in my previous experience, alignment was a word that was being misused to actually shut down ideas. So instead of having exploration and allowing exploration, it was immediate alignment to say, hey, this won't work, or let's kick the can down the road. And so I never want to align. I have a phrase, exploration before alignment. Then I love alignment, if we allow exploration. But if we kill exploration, then I'm not for alignment.
I love that these things have to go hand in hand, that you have to have something to align around. And if you don't do the exploration, then yeah, the alignment can be misused. I'm wondering about the process of alignment. Is this like get us all into a meeting and make a case and then we all, agree or disagree? Because I know with the process, there's multiple pieces to this. So can you talk us through, especially the meeting part, because I love meetings, and kind of what do those meetings look like when we're trying to come to alignment?
They can be as simple as like the input is an FAQ, like here are the key questions and here are the answers. And, at a place like Amazon, of course, you don't even give the FAQs out before the meeting happens. People show up. The first 15 minutes are reading the FAQs. Then there's open discussion around, hey, well, what conclusions would we draw from this? And there's some dialogue around that. And I'm actually a believer in AI-driven software. And so I'll touch on that because I think Amazon is, a great example, but it's kind of like great up till 2023. But we're in an AI era. So I think even Amazon's approach, what people look up to, will look like a dinosaur, within 3 years. So I'll touch on that in a second. But the process of getting alignment, is to have everybody be working from the same information. Here's the problem statement. Here's the FAQs. Now let's have a discussion. What conclusions would we draw? And to draw not only like one conclusion, oh, this is a good idea. Oh, yes, we have buy-in, but layered conclusions of like, this is a good idea within these parameters. This is the thing to watch out for. This is the thing to really accelerate, right? Probably as simple as that. And if you have some conclusions or recommendations that seem to have that common understanding to say, well, what are the necessary actions? Because that's actually what helps you build your execution plan. And that is, I think, what you're trying to do. Now, in terms of how you do this, the reality, in my view, is that we do too much in meetings and we can actually do much more asynchronously with software. And so part of what I'm working on now with my new company, Ritual, helps with that. But independent of that, Mammy, it's basically, can you imagine a situation where, people have the same FAQs and independently, they basically look at them and use software to say, here are the conclusions I'm drawing, and everybody does that independently. Then you take the list of all the conclusions that were drawn and basically create a heat map around where is it like super aligned or less aligned. And then you meet based not on what you already agree on, because that doesn't need any time, but the things that you don't agree on. That's a way to basically run a process where you're more efficient and you have fewer blind spots.
I love this idea of asking people to look at the same data set and say, what conclusions are you drawing? And then compile those to see where we aligned and where are we not. And then diving into the places where there's different interpretations and trying to figure out kind of how do we get to some shared alignment on what this means, or do we need more research on it? I'm thinking about a team I worked with a number of years ago that runs a grocery store, and they were trying to decide, they were in a big discussion about Earth Day, which happened to also be Easter that year. And they were part of the team that interpreted the situation as being, we're going to have so many more shoppers because people are going to be like coming in to get ready for Easter. And another set of people who were like, no one's going to show up because it's Easter. And so no one's going to be coming to the grocery store for Earth Day. And they were coming from two different places and didn't have any data to make those conclusions on. It was purely opinions. And so they decided to start asking customers at checkout about their Easter plans and to try to gather data to then come back together and say, what do we think we're going to do here? So I think it's such a fun approach to have people look at that data and bring it together. And such a more effective meeting, a more efficient meeting when you know what you actually need to talk about and doesn't have to be everything on the table. Is there is there a third part to this process, or are we going from exploration to alignment to execution?
Yes, there is a third part, which is decision making, and I'm a big believer in non-decision decision meetings, meaning like the decisions are obvious. And so if we do the first two stages that we spoke about, which are building and running explorations, so exploration and then alignment, then of course we need to have, meetings where we approve things, decision meetings, that kind of thing. But they tend to be a much lighter lift, which is, the best type of meetings there are one where people say, well, why are we even meeting? It's pretty obvious we all agree. And those are great meetings. They do happen. They're like a unicorn. But when you do the first two phases well, the chances that they happen are much higher. And these decision meetings are essentially reviewing the necessary actions and basically getting the people who are able to unlock those actions around the table so that they know what they need to go do. And they might move resources around or communicate something or just modify their plan in some way. So that's a huge accelerator because, what I'm trying to promote speed here really, because it's one thing to say, hey, we believe in it, it's a good idea. And then it's like crickets for 2 weeks and no one actually did anything to begin to action it. And so my take is basically if we agree and we're confident about the recommendations on the table, well, let's go into action mode and begin to unlock those things. So a good decision meeting is actually less about the thing you think you're deciding, but the second order things that need to be modified in order to make the thing you agreed to possible. So someone might say, well, yeah, we're on board. We'll find, headcount. Well, now let's use this meeting. Let's find that headcount now. So it's not about if we will allocate the headcount. It's what else we're going to maybe stop doing in order to make this possible. And so those things are really accelerators for execution. So good decision meetings are actually now defining the necessary actions and then greasing the wheels for the execution.
All right, I'm noticing that we're going to run out of time here. So I want to make sure to talk about how to do this at a team level. So a lot of people listening are not the founders of their businesses and senior management, right? They might be, but if you're if you are a manager inside of an organization and you're like, yes, this is what we've been missing. We get, an idea from wherever, and then we're told to figure out how to make it happen. And we want to bring this kind of process in so that we can be making better decisions, we can have better ideas, we can be moving forward more seamlessly and more quickly. Where do you suggest people start? How do we kind of get our team on board and get our other leaders and other partners on board and other stakeholders so that we can use a more process-oriented approach to our work?
I think it's really just a couple of things. The first is that once you have the idea or the objective, you work backwards from a milestone. So let's say there's a sponsor, someone at a higher level, you need to interact with them. Say, here's how we're thinking about it. Here's where we are on the thing. Well, when is that? Is that a month from now? Okay, great. Well, then what you need to do is assemble the working team and then have that team's really begin by clarifying and building a problem statement and spending a period of time sourcing input from this working team around the key questions that need to be addressed as part of the exploration work. So a problem statement with a question list, that is great progress. Now take that to the sponsor perhaps for a quick calibration. Hey, anything we're missing? Hey, does this look on track? Okay, great. That's the first step in building confidence with your sponsor so they actually give you the psychological safety and continue to give it to you. Then, of course, now you're running this exploration, which is a little bit of the detective work where the team looks into the key questions, tries to get to the bottom of them. Sometimes those answers are just, reasonable sort of reasoning through, questions and trying to produce kind of common sense answers. Sometimes, in the case of the grocery example you mentioned, you need to ask someone to go fetch data or build a test to get data, and that's fine too. It's kind of a mix between common sense and developing a way to collect the data. And then you basically assemble it. It could be a 3-pager, like a narrative that we do a lot of at Amazon, or an FAQ document. Now you take it to the sponsor and say, hey, read this. And based on this, here's the high level recommendations. Here's how we're thinking about the direction of this thing. Does it sound right? It's really working backwards and getting those things done in a good way. So how do you do those things well? I'm a big proponent of software. And so I think software workflows will really help you, which is why, I started the company Ritual, which I'm happy to share more about. But software kind of is a living system for this thing. You don't need software, but it makes life easier. You could also just sort of build a process and have a good, for example, program manager to keep everybody on track.
I wish we could go into like all the things around software and but we are running out of time. So, Atif, can you tell us about a great manager that you worked for and what made this manager such a fabulous boss?
Sure. I'll give a shout out to the CEO of Volvo. He just transitioned from the CEO role after 10 years, Håkon Samuelson, who was my boss and a very good mentor. And what made Håkon special, and he still does this, and his current corporate work, is his focus and obsession with the inputs. So he was not the type of CEO who wants to know how many cars did we sell yesterday, although that's important, right? Because the board is measuring him and the company on that. But he understood that the upstream really matters. So if you want to sell a lot of cars, you have to start thinking about, the things that will affect how many cars you sell, 6 months from now and 18 months from now. And those things are much more in the upstream stage. So he was willing to be a thought partner and, kind of in helping shape the factors and the drivers of things that will affect, kind of the medium and long-term performance of the company, and not just wait for those things to be in execution where now you're saying, oh, can't you do a little better? He realized that pre-execution is where you need to spend more of your time as a CEO, shaping things. And so for someone to be, very generous with their time, being a thought partner, help you avoid blind spots or really tighten up how you're thinking about cracking the code on some new growth thing is I think the better use of time for CEOs in terms of being number one on their list than just sort of day-to-day performance. And so I give him that shout out, and to see a global CEO with that approach is really, really encouraging.
And where can people get a copy of your book, Decision Sprint, and keep up with your work and learn more about what you do?
Sure. So decisionsprint.com is my website, and my book is available for retailers from the website. As I mentioned, I co-founded and I run a company called Ritual, which is an AI-driven problem-solving product. It's a SaaS product. Any team can download it. It's just a small monthly cost per user, and this is a product that helps you build and run explorations. So if you have an idea or an objective, you can actually kind of involve some collaborators and quickly and efficiently and smartly get to things like an FAQ or a narrative or a document you can take to a meeting to show your work on the upstream side. So ritual.work is the website for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on and chatting with me and talking us through the phases and the parts of the decision sprint model and how we can do better upstream work.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure.